Yes.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues and guests, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending where you are located, since we know that you are joining us from 3 continents. I am Helena Loermans, conservator in charge of the Department of Textile Conservation at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and on behalf of my colleagues, I would like to welcome you all um, at one of our informal webinar where we present our ongoing research, very often in collaboration with the colleagues within the Met and beyond. Our guest today is Helena Loermans, who has been researching, I'm so sorry, has been researching pattern canvas used in historic paintings and their to the textiles of that time. Helena was trained as a laboratory technician specialized in histology and pathology. She worked 15 years at Nijmegen University in the Netherlands before moving to Portugal 20 years ago, where she opened her own weaving studio. Helena's research bridges the arts of painting and textiles and informs the work of conservators in both specialties. Helena collaborated with our conservator, Cristina Balloffet Carr, in the interpretation of a linen fragment in the Met's collection, which has a pattern similar to the canvas that Helena will be describing today. Cristina, welcome Helena, and Cristina, I'm giving you voice first. Cristina, you muted.
Yes, not now. Anyway, sorry about that. Anyway, before I introduce Helena, just a little bit of business, which is this webinar is being recorded and it will be available on YouTube, accessible on the department's landing page for a period of about a month. There will be a Q&A at the end, and please direct your questions to me, Cristina Carr, and we will answer as many questions as time allows. If you include your email, we will respond to questions that remain unanswered. So Helena contacted me 5 years ago at the recommendation of a fellow weaver who suggested that I might be able to help her obtain a high-resolution image of an X-ray published in the Met's Journal in a wonderful article by Met Paintings conservator Charlotte Hale. Now, our department uses advanced imaging with analytical techniques, including microscopy and X-radiography, and these high-resolution images have become central to our work with historic textiles. Shortly after our initial exchange, Helena paid us a visit, bringing with her examples of her weaving. The sleuth work that Helena has undertaken, deconstructing and recreating historic canvases, resonated immediately with everyone in our department. And the lively conversations her work has sparked have resulted in an ever-growing collaboration. And I will now let Helena continue.
Thank you very much, Cristina, for these words. And thank you very much, Janina Poskropko, Cristina Balloffet Carr, and Antonia Capasso for making this possible. Did you know that these textiles are the canvases of these paintings? And that one of these paintings is in the Metropolitan Museum, The Supper at Emmaus by Velázquez. Welcome to the story of historic canvases, tablecloths, and textile fragments. This picture shows an overview of the paintings that are on a canvas with a pattern and of which I have recovered the weave draft. As Cristina mentioned, it started my connection with the Metropolitan started with this article, finding this article by Charlotte Hale. And I was really very happy to receive from Charlotte this high resolution X-ray image in which we can also see the textile. So I started to decipher this pattern, and as you can see, it was not easy, but it resulted in this weave draft. A weave draft is a graphic that we need to make the textile. It has all the information when we have our yarn and the loom to make that pattern textile. I will give a very brief explanation of the few parts on the loom that I will repeat and that we will come back to in the further presentation. The warp are the threads that are on the back beam of the loom. From there, the threads come through shafts in a certain order to the heddles, as you see on the right picture, in a certain order so that we can weave the cloth in front of it. This is the reconstruction of the canvas of this painting. And this brought me for the first time to the Metropolitan, where I met Cristina, and it was the start of a very brilliant cooperation, which resulted in this talk. The earliest painting on a canvas with a woven pattern, it's on the list that Claudio Ceccaroni published, is by Piero di Cosimo, 1495. And here we can see the X-ray image of that painting. And I have now started to change my paper and pencil to a digital pencil to follow all the threads and binding points in the image, in the X-ray, so that I can construct a graphic and the weave draft. We, as paintings conservators and textile conservators, may be familiar with the words warp and weft. It's where the thread count is in your documentation. So this is the place where these warp and weft are on the loom. The tie-up shows us how the shafts, where the warp is, are connected to the treadles, where the weaver then treadles to weave the weft. Why is this weave draft so important? It's unique. It enables us to weave reconstructions because it shows how the loom was dressed. Let me show you something about the tablecloths and canvases. And why is that? Also because Claudio Ceccaroni in his list mentions that the canvases are on tablecloths as a support. Titian painted the Superet Emmaus in 1530 on a plain weave canvas. The weave draft of a plain weave canvas we see on the left, and on the right hand it's the fabric view, which shows that every thread crosses in every moment. So the vertical and the horizontal threads crosses in every step. He painted the tablecloth in this pattern. Now, 6 years later, this portrait of Isabella d'Este was painted on this canvas. If we go back to the tablecloth and I draw the lines on top of it, and I draw the lines on the canvas, they look very similar. In a series of lectures organized by the Warburg Institute in 2021, Anna Forrest showed a group of fragments from a disassembled rat's nest that they found while reconstructing the roof of the Augsburg Hall. And I couldn't believe my eyes when she showed a close-up photograph of one of the pieces. If we put the lines on this piece, they match with the other lines. That brought me to try to find if there are textile fragments in museums' collections. And yes, on the website of the Metropolitan Museum, I found this piece from 15th century, which I will now give the floor to Cristina, who will explain more about this specific piece.
So this fragment is quite small. It measures about 5.5 centimeters by 6.5 centimeters. It is discolored and torn, and the reverse is partially obscured by paper. Under the microscope, the area visible at 10 times magnification is about 1 centimeter by 1.5 centimeters. So the image you see here, which is of the complete fragment, is a composite of 40 individual photomicrographs tiled together in Photoshop. Each photomicrograph is itself a composite of multiple images at the same spot, captured in successive focal points, and Z-stacked, which means that the areas in focus are blended in the software to result in one in-focus image. But if you combine the multiple photomicrographs, you place this minute detail in context, and each warp and weft thread is sharply defined with a depth of field, and that reveals how the threads interacted during weaving. The X-ray on the right shows all the threads superimposed in their configuration as a three-dimensional object, front, middle, and back. And what an X-ray shows are the spatial relationships in the woven structure of the textile. And that's plenty of information for Helena to determine the warp direction, map out the pattern repeats, and recreate the weave draft. And I give it back to Helena now.
Thank you. So what did I do with this piece of textile? I draw again all the lines and the binding points on top of it. And I found that there were subtle differences inside the, let's say, Lusango parts. I made a graphic from this, and we can see in the red dot, in the red circles, that there's one white dot coming up, which is not in the other ones, in the centers of the other ones. The weave draft shows us why that happened. In this case, where we see the red circles on the right hand, on the right bar, where the weft is shown, instead of the weaver following continuously the pattern, there's one treadle pressed in a place where I could say it breaks the line. So that means that in that line, the weft shows up while it's not in other lines. And this looks as if it's only a tiny detail, but it does mean that we are much more secure to say what's the weft direction and what's the warp direction in this piece. So even a piece of 5 by 6 centimeter can give us this information. Another interesting aspect of a photomicrograph is this one. I saw in one of the other Loos-angle forms that it was as if there was a thread, sorry, missing. And the photomicrograph shows that between these blue lines, there are still a few filaments left from what looks as if a transversal cut was made in this thread. This helps me to be more secure, or to figure out, if I could say, the weave draft of this piece. Because by making the weave draft in the Augsburg Hall finds, I missed thread. I mean, they are written here as a red line, both in the weave draft and in the textile, but I couldn't see them. But there was actually no other way that this pattern could be woven only with these threads there. So this photomicrograph from the Met collection piece helped me to incentivate, or to ask to go and travel to the Augsburg Hall, or ask high quality photographs from that piece, so that we can also be sure of the draft of that piece. Before I had this photomicrograph from the Met piece, I was thinking maybe the thread went on the back, but that I couldn't confirm with these photographs. Also, I could not ask photographs from the back because this piece was sewn together. So the weave draft is unique, we saw that. It enables the reconstructions because it shows how the loom was dressed, but it also shows where textiles end or canvases matches, or where subtle differences appear. A little sidestep. Before I became a weaver, I was involved in a histochemical and morphometical investigation of muscle fibers in the mouse. Now this looks as if it's a complete different area, but if we look at this picture, then I can still feel my love for creating, not creating for patterns and drafts, visualizing them. These are the first paintings that I did reconstruct the weave draft and woven reconstruction, and they were all different. So the question was, my curiosity, of course, will there be paintings with a canvas, with a canvas of the same pattern? Yes, there are. Alonso Sanchez Coelho and El Greco both painted on a canvas with exactly the same pattern. I cannot say it's the same, exactly the same textile, because I have not yet the thread count of the canvas of the Coelho painting. And then there was an interesting observation in these two X-ray images of these two paintings. I could see a line popping up in the same place all the time and very regularly. By constructing the weave draft, I could detect what happened there. The little blue circle on the right corner shows that there was one shaft tied to a treadle where it should not be. I mean, if that shaft would not have been treadled, then these lines would not have popped up. Because the warp threads, because the warp was lifted, came up, and then the weft went under this warp thread. The textile piece from the Metropolitan collection has the same pattern as a textile piece that is in the Victoria and Albert collection. Now, if we look at the numbers in the warp and the weft repeat, the density, then they are very similar. I must say that the numbers on the left piece were given to me by the conservator, and in the piece from the Met Museum, I have counted them in this textile piece. And then to finish my comparisons, the piece in the Met collection has a very similar draft as the pattern of the canvas in Titian's Vendramin family, although here there are more shafts tied on the treadles, but also the density is much different. The Titian canvas has a very high density. So my conclusion is that the weave draft and the reconstructions became a tool for the study of technical art history. To collect all this information, both from the paintings, the canvases, and the textile fragments, it became such a large amount of information that I recently started a database. Questions that do not have a clear answer. And maybe this one also came up in your mind. Why did painters use a canvas with a pattern? There are some answers, but I would also like to hear your ideas about it, and we can probably discuss that in the Q&A section. Another question is, how and where were these textiles made? So the weave draft can be a tool to study this further. For those who would like to touch the textile, on my webpage is a little box with a few pieces of the canvas, or a 20 by 20 framed reconstruction of the canvas that I wove until now. I was lucky that I could give a sandbox session, a workshop in the Conserving Canvas Symposium at Yale University in 2019. And I would love to come to the Met and do a similar workshop like this with you. An alternative is that I'm trying to find funding or to get young researchers or young career or students coming to Admira and to learn the process of the analysis and eventually the weaving, so that this work will be preserved for the future. With this, I thank you all very much for your attention.